Welcome to episode 48 of the Gambots podcast. I'm your host, Eric, and this is my co-host.
It's Christian.
On this week's episode, we're doing another special. We watched 4 movies that Benicio del Toro played a role in, and we're going to discuss them and, in particular, talk about how del Toro improved as an actor. So the first movie we watched was License to Kill, which is a James Bond movie, and this is one of the first movies that it appears that del Toro had a prominent role in the feature film itself. So this movie was interesting for me for one particular reason, and that is I have no idea how to spell license, and when I was typing in the show notes, it kept just coming up wrong, and it was very frustrating.
That's also, weirdly, that's also a word for me that I almost never get right on the first try.
Yeah, it was very, very frustrating. So this is a James Bond movie from 1989, and it has Timothy Dalton playing James Bond. I have never actually seen a Timothy Dalton Bond until this point, and I'm pretty sure he usually gets a pretty bad rap, and I did not think he was that bad.
Yeah, I agree. I have that in my notes as well. I'm the same. I'm a pretty big Bond guy, or I was for a little while, and I also had never seen a Timothy Dalton Bond. And I agree with you. I thought he did a pretty good job. I had seen him in a couple episodes of Doctor Who, and he plays a bad guy in a couple seasons of Chuck, which is an older TV show now. And I really liked him in both of those things. And so I was pleasantly surprised with this.
I will admit I'm not a huge Bond guy. I liked the couple of the Sean Connery ones that I saw. I really, really liked Skyfall. And then I liked none of the other stuff that... it's Daniel Craig, right? And I did not like any of the other Daniel Craig Bond movies. So I'm definitely not a Bond expert. But this one... It was okay. I thought, I did not like it as much as I like Skyfall, but it's, I think, a competent 80s action movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what it is. It's I say this about most of the Bonds, which is you pretty much know what you're going to get going into it. You can be excited or disappointed by, the individual plot elements, but almost every Bond movie is pretty much the same. They all get the job done.
I will say... It's rough watching 80s action movies, but I think Bond ones in particular, just because action movie set pieces have evolved so much over the past 30 years that the opening scene in this one I think is really cool on paper. It starts out with them, in a mini gunfight. Then they get into an airplane and they have Bond rappel down and they end up catching an airplane in midair with a helicopter, and it seems like it should be exciting, but everything that they the camera shots, the cuts, everything just seems slow, and it was just not as exciting as I think it could be.
That's something that I feel like has changed with time, because that's kind of common for a Bond movie. This felt like an old Bond movie that I would have watched. It felt like a Sean Connery or a Roger Moore, because that's how they are. They're even the most exciting of the action sequences aren't very fast paced. They're kind of slow and deliberate to kind of let you in on everything that's happening, and that's not really something that exists in action movies today. It's much more like flash and bang than it is deliberate.
Yeah, and I will say, I did appreciate the one stunt guy. One of the guys jumped 20 feet out of the helicopter and just landed. I was like, oh my gosh, there were no cuts. That guy legit just fell 20 feet and landed. But it's more like, oh, I hope he's okay, versus oh, that was really cool.
Yeah.
One thing that I do like about all Bond movies are the opening cinematics with a song attached to it. I did not love this song, but I still think they're cool.
Yeah, some of them more than others. I have all of them on my computer in one form or another. Not the videos, but the songs themselves, and there are some great ones. Me and my buddy are obsessed with the Skyfall theme song. We it's like a whole inside joke thing, but some of the old ones, the Goldfinger theme song is outstanding. So I had kind of forgotten about it, and then as soon as it started, I was like, "Oh yes, we do get one of these."
Yeah. And so let's just give a quick rundown of this plot because I found it to be a very convoluted plot. It starts out with James Bond going to a wedding, and then the groom is a DEA agent, so they go and they catch the main bad guy. Main bad guy escapes, kills best friend's wife, and then maims best friend in a way we got to talk about with a shark. Bond then goes scuba diving, releases drugs, ends up in South America. He ruins the friendship between like the drug dealer and his crew, and then ruins his drug trade, and that's it. And then they throw in somewhere that the drug lord's going to shoot down a U.S. airliner, just randomly in the end. That's thrown in there.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like this felt like three different bad guy plot lines that were just like, no, we're doing this now. Like, oh, I mean, all right.
Yeah, So just one thing I wanted to point out, there's a wedding in the beginning of this, and I don't know if this is some 80s wedding tradition that died out. Everyone was like, I came here to kiss the bride, and like they full on kissed the bride on the lips.
Yeah, that was a little strange.
So I had no idea what was up with that. But I liked some parts of this movie. Like they still were in the era when supervillains were campy and just over the top. So at the one part, his friend gets captured and they just have a shark eat his leg, but like not the rest of him, just his leg.
Yeah, and just the one.
Yeah, and part of an arm. Like it makes no sense what the reasoning is behind this. But then you have a lot of the classic Bond lines when he's dealing with people, which was amazing. He kills someone with an electric eel tank, which I'm very curious if is actually possible.
Yeah, like the drug dealer returns Felix, and the best friend I should say is Felix, who is kind of like a catch-all for an American spy. Like in some movies he's CIA, but Felix is kind of like an in and out fixture in a lot of other James Bond movies.
Oh, that's good to know because I got I don't watch a ton of these old ones, and the ones I've seen haven't been for a while. I was like, are these people relevant?
This might be the last one he's featured in because I don't remember him in any Pierce Brosnan ones. But it's the same kind of thing where Felix is a different actor all the time. But he's definitely in one of the he's in Casino Royale, which is the first Daniel Craig one. And I mean, he's definitely not missing part of an arm and a leg. But that was supposed to be like kind of a soft reboot of the series, so I guess that's okay.
Yeah. So just moving ahead in this movie a little bit. After that, we actually don't really see Benicio in this movie until what, like 30 or 40 minutes?
No, he's there when they kidnap the friend and the wife, so it's maybe the 20-minute mark.
That's right.
And we don't see him for a long time in Columbus, which was what like I had a note in here like, oh, he gets a much earlier introduction in this than he got in Columbus.
Yeah. His first big scene was when they were in the bar, which we will jump to shortly. Sorry, I want to scrub that part back. So one of the set pieces that I thought was really awesome and a thing that they should bring back in more Bond movies was this had a lot of scuba diving in it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like scuba rescue, scuba fight, scuba drug bust, like it was a lot of underwater stuff. And that was a mainstay of a lot of Bonds, like the whole way back, and yeah, it's not really done anymore.
No, you really don't see it in too many action movies, and I think it's because you cannot make it like fast paced.
Yeah.
But I think that scene where he was infiltrating the drug boat had one of the best set pieces in the movie, which was him taking the harpoon gun, shooting a boat, jet skiing somehow onto an airplane, and then climbing up. Like, ridiculous, but actually a very cool piece itself.
Well, okay, so I have a note in here. Was he attached to a boat when he was jet skiing, or was he jet skiing off the back of the plane?
Maybe he hit the plane. I'm not entirely sure because you just see it hit something underwater. So I guess it had to have been the plane.
Because I have a note on here that says he jet skied off that plane so well that he outpaced it, caught up to it, and then grabbed it, which is completely impossible.
Yeah, it's not very well explained how he caught up to it, but yes.
Like he does this weird move where he like whips around and somehow he outpaces the boat that's or the plane that's dragging him. That was one that took me out for sure. I was like, oh no 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 no.
Yeah. And so after this scene is when we actually get our first, I think, real big piece with Benicio in a Florida bar, which I gotta say, James Bond in the Florida Keys is not a setting that I think works too well. He's just like lurking around picket fences and stuff. It just does not work. And then he goes to like a Florida bar.
I gotta say though, this Florida bar really checked out. Like I feel like this is 100% what I would expect a Florida bar to be like. And since this, I think, even back then was primarily for more British audiences, I have no trouble believing that this is exactly what a British person thinks a Florida bar would be like. It was like somebody shot a gun and the entire population of the bar went like, "Oh, are we brawling? Don't mind if I do."
Yeah, and the go-go dancer or the stripper or whatever she was danced the whole time until Bond ended up under her.
Yeah,
and then she's like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?"
Like throughout the entire fight where somebody's trying to stab James Bond with a swordfish.
Oh my gosh, they pulled the swordfish off the wall and tried to kill him with it.
Yeah, very Florida.
Yeah, and so Benicio was in this, and it's when you first start hearing him talk, and he's the main bad guy's like number one henchman or very good friend henchman. I don't entirely know his role, but he's like the killer of the henchmen. He doesn't really have anything but to go about and shake people down. And I'm wondering, were a lot of his early roles just to be a generic like unhinged Latin villain?
I'm pretty sure, yes.
Because I mean, he plays it well, and I think he owned the scenes that he was in because obviously he got cast again, which we can talk about the director in this in Columbus towards the end. So he was fine in it, but then he disappears again for a really long time until they end up back in South America.
Yeah, I mean, he has no character development in this. He's not really a part of the stories other than like he's just kind of almost a set piece. Like he's just a straight enforcer. He doesn't start as like you never get like any backstory or anything. He's just this kind of comic book villain.
Yeah, and so this is like the first 40 or 50 minutes of the movie somehow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this movie is probably 2 times longer than it needs to be.
Oh my god, it is so long. I think it picks up when they go to South America, but I put a note in here, and I think it was whenever he snuck back on the boat to the chamber, the pressure chamber scene. I was like, this movie's over. And then I looked, and there were like 40 minutes left.
That pressure chamber death had me dying. Like, I was laughing so hard I actually had to pause the movie.
Yeah, that reminds me of like a very 80s way to have someone die. It reminded me of what was the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where he Total Recall? Yeah. That reminded me of a death you would see in Total Recall.
Yeah, it's simultaneously like, I'm sure at the time it was like gross and like not funny, but looking at it now, it was really funny. Cuz
totally.
Like he starts screaming and you're like, "Oh yeah, that like cuz he gets put in a pressure chamber and they crank the pressure up real high and then they like unplug it so that it all shoots out at once. And so he starts screaming from the pressure, and then they show him again, and he's, like, blown up like a blowfish, and then he explodes.
Yeah, it's insane. Did you ever see Big Trouble in Little China? Yeah. It's essentially how, like, one of the Thunder Gods dies at the end when he gets mad. It's a fatality from Mortal Kombat 2.
Oh my god, yes.
That part was great.
Yeah, that had me rolling. The other part that had me laughing pretty hard was Bond goes rogue about halfway through this movie. They tell the British government comes to Florida, I guess, and tells him, this isn't any of your business. Just because they attacked your friend, you have to come home. Like, and he's like, well, screw you guys, I'm doing it anyway. And he like tries to escape, and they try to shoot at him, and the guy in charge says, no, don't shoot down there. There's too many other people. And they're in a historic monument that they made a point to show it was closed. And they were the only people there. And when it cuts back to Bond, he's literally just running through some trees and there is nobody around.
Absolutely could have took the shot. They also name this movie License to Kill, but they revoke Bond's license to kill. This should not have been the title of the movie. Like, they should have just given him full license to kill.
Yeah, pretty wild.
So, like we were saying, this movie, it's in South America for a little bit. I think that's the best part. He's trying to go undercover. He's infiltrating the bad guys' organization and stuff. And all that stuff's cool. And then it turns out there's the whole other plot towards the end where this guy has some sort of rocket launcher to blow up a U.S. airliner unless they pay him a lot of money. So then on top of getting revenge, they're like, well, we need a reason to have Bond actually also be involved in this because we need the last 30 minutes to make sense. And so that's a whole thing that culminates in a super slow, like, tractor trailer chase scene.
Yeah.
Where people are constantly shooting these rockets and missing from 200 yards.
Yeah, this movie's so long. Like,
so, I don't know. I thought the ending to this could have been much quicker.
Yeah. I think if this movie and this exact plot were made with, like, today's action movie format, it would be a lot faster because these fight scenes would be much more fast-paced. I think they would probably chop, like, 20 minutes out of it.
Oh, for sure. And another area they could chop are the competing love interests that he has with the bad guy's girlfriend and his partner in this one, who's randomly fell in love with him and jealous that he's talking to someone else after she met him, and then they immediately made love. None of that makes any sense. He tells her and Q to leave like 5 times. That's multiple plots of this movie, is him telling them to leave and then them just coming back. It's completely unnecessary.
I was super excited to see Q, though.
Oh, that was a cool scene.
Yeah, like, Q is always one of my favorite parts of the old Bonds. All those little gadgets. And so when he showed up, I was like, oh, yes, this actually now starts to feel like an actual Bond movie.
That is one thing that the newer movies have lost, are the gadgets. They're super corny and make no sense, like him having toothpaste that's also an explosive, but it's so much more fun.
Yeah, like, they're goofy, but they bring an appeal. Also, speaking of goofy, were those ninjas?
Oh, that's one of my notes is this movie's not really culturally correct. Those were ninjas, but the person who was running them was from Hong Kong.
Yeah, like, he gets captured and I'm like, these are straight up ninjas. What is happening?
Out of nowhere.
Yeah, completely.
Overall, what did you think about Benicio in this one?
I think for such an early performance, I think he did a good job. He's fairly menacing for not really having much of a voice presence. Like, he doesn't really speak that much in this movie, but he does get across that he's an intimidating dude, and like, I can see how he could continue to get cast in that kind of a role.
Yeah, I liked him in this one. He, like you're saying, how he's intimidating. He has this like look and smile that I saw him do in the 2 other movies we watched that it was like a live action. And he pulled that off well enough that I think he kept getting roles until they started giving him more lines. So he was solid in this one. This was directed by John Glenn, who, we did not plan this, also ended up directing the next movie we're going to talk about, Christopher Columbus. I was blown away when I saw that, and I was like, it makes sense that Benicio's in both of these.
Yeah, I guess he was like, hey, I need a bad guy. Well,
John Glenn also directed Octopussy, and then, do you know how this did on Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah, so it's got a 77% critic score, 60% audience score. I'd probably lean towards a 60%. What about you?
Yeah, I would lean more towards the 60. I don't think it's a horrible movie, but it's one that I'm going to watch once and probably never.
Yeah, and I think it really only ranks that high because it's elevated by the franchise. Like, I think if this weren't a James Bond movie, if this were just a generic spy movie, I don't think it would be nearly as entertaining. I think it's really elevated by being a part of a larger work.
Yeah, and I think its box office shows that. So it had a $32 million budget with $156.1 million box office. Good. A lot of that has to be from it just being a James Bond movie.
Oh yeah, 100%.
All right, so the next movie we on this list that we watched was Christopher Columbus: The
Ooh, boy.
Discovery. This not loving. I did not think this was a very good movie.
Yeah, we can get that out
What
of the
about
way real quick.
uh, dubiously? I'm very dubious on how historically accurate this was. I know some parts of it were wildly wrong. So what about you?
Man. I guess, like, my overarching note is something that I wrote about halfway through the movie, which is this somehow manages to make Christopher Columbus's voyage 100% more dramatic than I think it actually was, while also remaining incredibly boring.
Yeah. I mean the entire dude, cuz I was keeping track of time on this one because where I watched it had ads every 5 minutes and I was like, is this almost over yet? He did not set out to start sailing the ocean until 50 minutes into a 2-hour long
I
movie.
could
And then he was only on the ocean for 30
I could
minutes.
not believe how long it took him to get on a boat. I couldn't believe it.
It was insane.
It was all, and like the pacing of this movie made no sense to me. And maybe I just wasn't paying as close attention as I should have, but like I didn't know how much time was passing. He goes and appeals the king and queen, which King Ferdinand was played by Tom Selleck, which is quite a choice and not the right one. And he's denied, and then he goes back with more information later, and they were like, "How have you been this past 2 years?" And I was like, "How 2 years?"
Dude, from the time of the start of this movie till he left was like 8 years, and there's no concept that it had passed except he hooked up with, I think, his friend's daughter, and then he had a child.
Yeah. Catherine Zeta-Jones, who is also in Traffic, so we're just kind of swinging from like one connection to the next, I guess. This feels like 6 degrees of Benicio del Toro.
Yeah. Oh, man. Also, this movie is weirdly. I don't know. Well, I think the part with the Native Americans is racist on like the Hollywood level, but also Columbus just hates the Turks at the beginning of this, and I actually think that could be valid for, back in the day, the Spaniards might have hated the Turks.
Yeah, so like my first note for this movie is it starts heavy on the racism. Like they sail into this port and it's like, the Turks are gonna rob us, and then they do.
I will say, I think Spaniards probably would have felt that way though back then.
Yeah, it was a lot. And yeah, when they finally hit the islands off North America, that the racism comes back pretty hard because it goes away for a while because
yeah.
they're just bopping around in Europe, not really doing anything.
Yeah. Oh well, we got to get on that. It was weirdly racist, but also randomly the the sailors were the most moral of the people in the
Oh
movie
my
somehow. But
God.
we'll talk about it at the end. I was happy that they did a brief glimpse into the Inquisition that was going on in this time period. And my problem is I don't know enough about Columbus, but I know at this time period almost everyone agreed that the earth was round. Like the church wasn't heavily disputing this fact because a lot of science back then came from like church funding and a lot of scientists were very religious. So they all worked in a way to being God's plan. Like I don't think in this time frame that they would have been like, no, you can't do this because the earth's flat. They knew it was round. The general consensus was it was just going to be too far.
Yeah, yeah, it's oh boy, like this. This is another one where we talk about it being too long. Benicio doesn't show up in this till they're getting on the boat, which you said is in the 50-minute mark.
Yeah, so like between 40 and 50 is when they're getting all the sailors, and then at like 49 they actually leave the port.
Oh boy. They spend too much time on the boat. Like for a movie where I kept saying, when are they going to get on this boat? They spend too much time on this boat because nothing happens. It's just scene after scene of them being like, when are we going to get there? Soon, hopefully. And then somebody's in the background like, Columbus doesn't know what he's talking about. And it's just that for 30 full minutes.
And they tried to introduce the whole scene of the Portuguese sabotaging it with the criminal. I don't think that's historically accurate. Also, when the criminal's like Portuguese accomplice was caught and then he killed him, why was he going through with this? Like, clearly his golden goose was gone, but he's like, he was beating up the Columbus's like Jewish friend.
Yeah, 100%. If I'm that guy, like if somebody walked up to me and was like, "I'll pay you good money to commit crimes," and I was like, "All right," and then that guy died, and he was the only other one that knew I was in on this, I'd have been like, "Well, guess I'm not committing these crimes. I'm just gonna keep my head down, and I'll be 100% fine. Like Columbus will pay me for this voyage, and nobody needs to know that I was ever a part of this."
Yeah, I really think they were like, we need a fight scene. He's in the ocean. Let's get that shark that we had from James Bond back in this. And he can eat him because a leg popped up. They used the same leg in both scenes. I'm calling it.
I would love if that were true.
That had to have been the same animatronic shark.
Oh, man.
These movies released 2 years apart, so
They easily could have had that stuff in storage.
yeah. One thing also that I liked about this movie, but then it was handled horribly, was they actually brought to light that once the Spaniards defeated the Moors, that they were like kicking the Jews out of Spain if they didn't convert, which is a very dramatic choice for someone to make. And then they kind of gloss over it by the same scene being like, "Hey Columbus, you actually can go on your voyage now too." And the two Jewish people he worked with are like, "You go, Columbus. Don't worry about us." And they just kind of they bring it up to completely ignore it within 20 seconds.
Why was that scene in the movie? I agree with you. Like there was no payoff to that whatsoever. They were just like, "Oh man, Spain is crazy." Like that was that.
Yeah, dude, I think the biggest problem with this movie is it doesn't follow like the modern plot progression where there's rising tension and action and a climax. It's just a series of events that happen until he finds the new world and then sails back.
Which brings us to the new world, which we've got to talk about.
Oh yes. So I will let you lead off on this one.
All right. So, I mean, first and foremost, we're back to the racism almost immediately. They show what I assume to be plague rats, like, hopping off the boat and swimming ashore, so that's a fun little foreshadowing to, like, 90% of native populations being killed.
Yeah, but just a light foreshadowing. That's all you see of it. So if you don't know that happens, you get no more information than that.
I did really like while the Spaniards were like planting their flags in the ground and singing hymns, and all the natives were standing around like, "What's happening?" Like they all had this look on their face like, "What?"
Yeah. Man, the meaning of the native, it's not great. And I think they try to allude to that the natives thought they were gods until there was the whole fighting stuff at the end. So I can kind of get that.
The guy says it just unprompted. Like the natives come out and they're like rubbing sand in the guy's beard, and the translator I think was like, "Oh, they think we're gods." And I was like, "Where did you get that from? They're not like bowing down or anything, like they're trying to play with you."
Yeah, completely out of nowhere that they just make that assumption. My favorite part while they're on while Columbus is actually in the New World is he's having dinner with one of the captains, and apparently no one else is steering the ship, and it just crashes into the shore.
Yep, just runs aground. I think my favorite bit from that part of the movie was he put so much faith in that translator. Like the translator is standing there, and they've already gone through a scene at this point which has shown that the translator cannot speak their language. Like they say something like, "Oh, this man can speak every language known to man," and they land and he starts throwing words at them, and they're all just staring. So we have established the translator is out of his depth. And then Columbus comes in and he's like, "Tell them this," and he gives them this big elaborate speech. And to his credit, the translator looks at Columbus and looks at the native with this emotion of like, "I have no idea what I'm doing."
Yeah, I mean that part was. I think the translator was actually pretty funny in this one because he was so sure of himself, and then you hear him trying a bunch of the different like Asian languages and just nothing working. And they're not, it doesn't even like cross their minds that they're in the wrong place. They're like, this guy's not as smart as he thinks he is.
Yeah. Like, one man and one man alone has the position of like, hey, maybe we shouldn't terrorize these people.
Oh, so to set the scene, this movie is weird at it. Up to an hour and 40 minutes in, Christopher Columbus was clearly the hero of this film. And then randomly, when they don't have enough gold, he just turns crazy, and they actually start showing the bad side to Columbus. He's stealing all of their jewelry. He's pillaging anything they have. He's taking his crew's items. One of his captains just leaves randomly and finds a little bit of gold, and then he just takes them in, like 6 of the natives into slavery.
Yeah, this movie couldn't decide how it felt about Columbus. Like you said, for until they land, he is the hero. Like, he's faithfully trying to steer this ship where he knows that it needs to go, and like he's enduring mutiny and he's enduring sabotage, and he's but he's staying strong. And then they land on the shore and he's like, well, I guess we're going to pillage, and I guess we're gonna be slavers, and yeah, I guess this was the plan all along. Let's get to it. And it was such a dramatic heel turn. And then, yeah, I guess some of the people are very troubled by the idea of slavery for a country that was actively engaging in it this whole time.
I mean, the movie earlier referenced they were keeping some of the Moors as slaves.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, this is a culture that had no problem with slavery, so I have no idea why they... I mean, granted, it's the right stance to take to be opposed to slavery, but I have no idea why these characters seem so troubled by his, like, oh, throw 6 of them on the ship. I would have thought these people would have been like, throw all of them on the ship. Let's take them.
Exactly, and that's what I don't understand. What I don't like about this movie is it seems like it's trying to be like, look, we understand Columbus did a lot of bad things. Let's throw in some, some people just saying so, just so we look good. But it's like, why would this random sailor be like, we can't enslave these people? That guy doesn't care.
Not at all.
Half these, like 6 of these people were criminals.
And maybe the colors in the video I was watching were off a little bit, but none of the gold looked gold. Like, when they had a bunch of it in that guy's hand, I thought they were chestnuts. And when they had all of it in that basket when the captain returned from, like, upriver or wherever he went, he's like, look, I found gold. And, like, it just looked like peanut brittle to me.
Yeah, it did not look convincing. And also, when he finally gets back to Spain, he did not bring that much gold. He didn't bring any silk. I mean, like, granted, the Americans have a lot of stuff that they brought back that was very valuable. They alluded to the tobacco and things like that. But for this movie, he brought back, like, a music box filled with gold. Yep. Half of it jewelry, clearly from, like, Spain.
And, like, King Tom Selleck even was like, all right, now, good job, where's my gold? And he opens up this little treasure chest, and he's like, oh, yes. And I was like, a king would not be impressed by this tiny box of gold.
No. If we have time, I also want to, like, complain a little bit about, like, the movie's over-reliance on, like, the Spanish monarchy financing this adventure, because they actually did not finance a majority of it. It was mostly by, like, Columbus got private, like, not institutions, but, private financiers to do this, and then the crown just kicked in so much money.
Yeah. And they keep alluding to, like, a big secret that he has. And, like, no one else can make it across the ocean because they don't know the secret. And the whole time, at the end, you find out the secret is there's air currents that just nobody knows about.
Yeah, they just call it rivers of air.
Like, oh, there's an air current that crosses the ocean. Like, yeah, man, it's a trade wind. I feel like people knew about this for a long time.
Yeah, man, some of these things. All right, let's talk about Benicio in the end, because he takes the biggest heel turn. He's introduced, and it seems like he's going to be a good guy. He's the Master of Arms, which is Columbus's number 2 on the ship, is Benicio's father, and he joins, and he's like, I want to be closer with my father, which I didn't understand. Was Benicio a criminal or something?
Yeah, so Columbus asks Catherine Zeta-Jones, like, what their deal is. Like, why does the dad hate Benicio? And she says he courted their sister, or he courted Catherine Zeta-Jones's sister, then she got pregnant, and he didn't want anything to do with it, so he, like, called her a whore, and so she killed herself. And so he was, like, disowned from the family.
Gotcha. So then he joins the ship. He seems okay enough until they get to the island, and then he becomes a warlord.
Yeah, so, like, his whole arc is bananas. He wants to redeem himself for being, whatever. Like, the dad calls him a rapist, but the story that Catherine Zeta-Jones tells doesn't quite add up to that. Then he does exactly no work to redeem himself. He says he wants to get closer to his father, but I don't think they share more than 2 words while they're on the boat. And then he joins the mutiny and holds a knife to his father's throat.
Yeah, and when they're on the island, he's just like hoarding native women, kills one of the crew members, and then when his father comes to stop him, fights his father, kills his father. The crew's just completely okay with this. I mean, they were about to mutiny against one captain. They could all definitely take down Benicio. Like, he would not beat the entire crew.
Oh boy, yeah, like, and then they're like, we have a gift for you, and they give him his dad's possessions, and he starts, like, ugly crying about it, and I was like, why is he crying? He just murdered his dad in cold blood, like, 6 minutes ago, and didn't really have any kind of a problem with it, but he's looking at this mirror like, oh no.
Yeah, and then one of the native women kill him.
Oh my god, that was fantastic. I have in my notes, I hope this naked woman stabs Benicio, and then right afterwards I wrote, oh yeah, she got him.
Also, a lot of topless women in this movie, which I get. They're trying to be authentic, but I'm a little bit surprised this was a PG-13.
Yeah, like there's kind of nothing for the entire movie, and then the last 20 minutes is just full of nudity.
Yeah, yes. How many like young boys do you think just went to watch this for that reason alone?
I don't think anyone went to watch this movie.
Speaking of that, do you know its budget in box office?
The budget was $54 million. It made just a little over 8, so not even a fifth of its budget it made back. So it did nothing.
It bombed. Its Rotten Tomato score is a 7%, audience score at 17%, and you know, I don't think it's 7% bad. I would agree more that it's more like 17 to 20% bad. Like, it's not one of the worst movies I've ever seen, but it's definitely not good, and I would not suggest anyone to watch it.
I'm tempted to agree with you, but I'm afraid I'm like grading on a curve, because when I see a 7%, the expectation game kicks in, and I'm like, oh, this has to be one of the worst movies ever made, and it definitely wasn't that. Like, I've seen Skyline, so this doesn't really compare, but it's real bad. Like, the 17 is pretty accurate.
Yeah. So, what did you think of Benicio in this one?
Just, I mean, he was good, I guess. My main complaint with him is that every other movie I've seen with him, including the 3 other movies on this list, has a fairly prominent accent. I mean, in Traffic he speaks mostly in Spanish, but like, he has a fairly prominent accent, and in this, when they introduce him and he's supposed to be from Spain, he's just like, oh yeah, I'm a volunteer. I was like, ooh, wow, that does not connect with the Benicio that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I liked him in this one. I think a lot of people in this overacted. Ooh, yeah. And so there are some scenes where it's like, oh yeah, he's going for it hard, but I thought he was fine. I mean, I can see why he kept getting... It seems like he really just kept getting slightly larger roles. Like, his role in this was a little bit bigger than he had in License to Kill.
And I thought he was good in the role that was written for him. I just thought the role was terrible.
Oh yeah, definitely. All right, and now on to what is the most critically acclaimed movie on our list tonight, Traffic. I had never watched this movie, and I've always really wanted to. And I know it's won a lot of Academy Awards. We'll go into that towards the end, but while I liked it, I was a little bit let down by it.
Yeah, the Academy Award thing is really all I really knew about this movie going into it. I knew it had won some stuff. I knew it was critically acclaimed, but I didn't really know anything else about it.
Yeah, so the basic premise of this was they wanted to show the drug trade in the early 2000s from four different perspectives. It was from the users, the dealers, the like cops on the US line, and then the cops, and to a certain extent like the suppliers or the people who protect the suppliers on the Mexican side.
Yeah.
And
I got lost in this movie a lot.
so I did too. Well, I didn't get lost. One thing that really set out to me when I first saw this was it was really grainy footage. I thought it was a little bit shaky, and every one of the four stories had a very distinct color palette.
Oh, yeah.
That I did not like, but when I read on Wikipedia, it was the director's choice because he was worried that the audience wouldn't be able to follow the story. So he gave each one their own distinct color so you could sort of associate it with that. Like the politicians one was blue, Benicio's in the Mexican side had like that. I don't know if it's sepia, but it's how everyone does. It's in Mexico. It's like brighter. So I understand why they did it. I just did not personally like it that much.
Yeah, the blue was jarring.
Yes, it was. I thought the blue was too dark, and then I thought everything in Mexico was too bright.
Yeah, and especially jumping from one to the other was a lot sometimes.
Yeah, and so of the four stories, did you like any of them better than you like the others?
I guess I probably liked Benicio's the most. Like he played a really convincing guy, kind of just trying to do the best he can in a crappy situation.
Right. So Benicio plays a cop. Him and his partner are the good cops in Mexico. They're trying to actually follow the law, and they end up joining up with a general who's supposed to be fighting one of the cartels in Tijuana, and then it turns out that the general is actually corrupt, and he's working with another cartel from further south that's trying to move into Tijuana. But it is like a story of him trying to do what's best for the average citizen, and he crushes acting in this movie. Like, I thought he was so good in this.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought his was by far the best. I think the weakest one was the drug dealer it was the wife whose husband got arrested.
Oh, yeah.
And then she had the kid. She said she was 30. She did not. She looked much older than 30.
Well, that's Catherine Zeta-Jones again.
Was that? I did not realize that. Man, there's a lot of strands going on here.
Yeah, I didn't really care for Michael Douglas's story. I guess it was all right. I didn't really care for Catherine Zeta-Jones' story either, though, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought Michael Douglas's story had a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
I could not stand his daughter in it, though. So Michael Douglas is a judge who gets appointed to the president's cabinet to help deal with the war on drugs. They got to win it. And then it turns out his daughter ends up becoming a drug abuser. And a lot of his story is like learning that there's nothing really in place to fight this. Drug addiction is not treated like a disease. And then it's him trying to find his daughter, who really goes down the rabbit hole. I could not stand her, and I think that really hurt my enjoyment of that story. But I actually thought it was a very good depiction of drug abuse and drug dependency.
I hated his wife. I didn't mind the daughter so much, but they had just dropped off this kid at the hospital who had OD'd on hard drugs, and the daughter had just been doing hard drugs and literally freebasing, and he was like, there have to be consequences for this. She needs to be grounded at the very least. And the wife is like, she spent the night in jail, isn't that enough? And I'm like, no, what's wrong with you?
Oh, I know. The wife was bad. She's like, I did drugs, and then it's just so weird. He's like, wait, what? You were in college. It was different. It's just parts of it were bad. Also, all of her stupid rich kid friends, they were at a party, and they were all so boring. And I think this movie shows you why you should not do hard drugs, because everyone in this movie is just sweaty, boring, and then have these fake deep conversations about sarcasm. Pull out an N64 or something.
That's what I said. This didn't do anything for me on the preventative, oh, if you do drugs your life will fall apart. It was don't do drugs or you'll be sweaty and gross in a dark room. And I'm like, these kids look awful.
Yeah.
I did love, like, they had a great line when the one kid starts to overdose, and the girl's like, call your dad, he's a doctor, and the kid's like, my dad maps the pig genome, call your dad, he's a neurosurgeon. And, like, I genuinely, like, that, I felt like that line was funnier than it deserved to be.
Yeah, and so the other storyline follows cops, like two DEA agents, basically following Catherine Zeta-Jones and trying to bust her husband. They have a whole thing at the end. That was my second favorite storyline, I think. I thought Don Cheadle was in it. He's very good. And then I cannot remember his partner's name, but he was my second favorite character.
Ray.
Ray, yeah. Really liked Ray.
Yeah, speaking of the casting, I was surprised that the Michael Douglas storyline takes place mostly in Washington because it's all political. But this movie had some real actual politicians in it, like actual senators. Orrin Hatch was in it, Chuck Grassley, Harry Reid, Barbara Boxer. Like, those are all actual U.S. senators, some of them still sitting right now.
Yeah, also read the Wikipedia article on that. They wanted to be as accurate as they could, so they talked to some politicians about this, and they even offered to be in it, or, you know, however it is, because they thought it was an important message, I think, that this movie was trying to get out about the war on drugs.
Yeah, I was surprised to see them.
Yeah, that was surprising. Overall, I did really like this movie, and I think it was well done. I wish I had watched it earlier, because I think a lot of the stuff they're referencing is way more relevant to the year 2000 than it is now. I think that there's a prime opportunity for not a remake of this movie, but a reimagining with the opioid epidemic that is going on right now, because I really think I see a lot of parallels, at least in the side about the senator's daughter, and really what you see going on around here with people not really getting treatment, and it's just a huge problem right now. So I think there is a possibility for this to make a comeback.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
What did you think about Benicio overall?
I thought he was good. I thought he was convincing. Like I said, as the guy that's kind of like just doing the best he can. I think, as much as it pains me to say it, as much as I love the next movie on our list, I think this is probably his best role of the ones that we watched. I might like the next movie better, but I think his role in this one was better.
Yeah, I agree. He was really good in this one, and it's weird because he doesn't show a lot of emotion in this, but it makes sense for his character because he always needs to be guarded because he's actually being watched a lot, and the rare times you do see him show emotion, like when his friend's killed, it comes across even more like, oh wow, he does have range. It's not just like he's being monotonous the whole time to be monotonous. Yeah. So I liked him in this. I think the Academy did as well. He won Best Supporting Actor for this role. The director won Best Director. They won Best Editing, and they won Best Adapted Screenplay.
So he did win Best Supporting Actor for this year. He was up against Jeff Bridges in The Contender. He was up against Willem Dafoe in Shadow of the Vampire, Albert Finney and Aaron Brockovich, which I think is also a Steven Soderbergh movie, who is the director for this. Yeah. And Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator, which was an unbelievable role. So like I'm actually surprised he beat Joaquin Phoenix this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was good. I think the Academy really liked this movie because I don't know if they had seen something like it before.
Yeah, that's true.
You alluded to this. This was directed by Steven Soderbergh, who did Aaron Brockovich, Ocean's 11, The Informant, and then a personal favorite of mine, Logan Lucky. Do you know how this did on Rotten Tomatoes?
It did really well. It's got, I mean, you had mentioned before that this was the best reviewed movie that we did for this episode. It got a 92% from the critics and 85% from the audience. That's really high. I mean, not necessarily undeserved. I would probably lean closer to the 85 than the 92, but like that's an outstanding score for Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't know if I put it in the 90s. I'm glad I watched it, but it is definitely an Academy movie. But it is also the most fiscally successful of the movies we watched. It had a budget of $46 million, and its box office was $207.5 million. Nice. And the final movie on our list is Dora and the Lost City of Gold. Now, we had talked about this one on our podcast before, so we probably will not get as in-depth as we did. But I gotta say, this is the first time I watched it. Christian, you had watched it before. I actually really ended up enjoying this movie, and I kind of did not think I would.
It's great. It catches you by surprise.
My wife was Snapchatting you while we were watching it.
I was loving it. Some of the Snapchats were absolutely hysterical. I was at work and I was really enjoying that.
So I never saw Dora. I've never watched Dora the Explorer. I know what it is just because you see so much about it, especially when it was huge. But yeah, it wasn't bad. I really liked that their take at the very beginning was Dora as like an in real life streamer going through the jungle explaining what the animals were. I thought that was like legitimately funny.
Yeah, this movie, I think I said the last time we had talked about it, it gets all of its humor from being hyper self-aware. It knows exactly what it is, and it knows exactly how to play to that.
I agree with you. Like, all the funniest bits were about that. Like, her parents just being like, Dora, you're a weirdo. You need to go to a city to learn to socialize. Yep. Every line from Pena in this was gold.
Oh, I agree. Like, he was one of the main reasons I wanted to go see this was Michael Pena as the dad. And like the bit where he's trying to warn her about the dangers of the city, but the only thing he tells her about is raves.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Like, at no point is he like, and I mean, it's a kid's movie, so you can't really, but at no point is he like, hey, you're a 16-year-old girl who spent your whole life in the jungle and now you're going to Los Angeles. Be aware of drugs. He's like, hey, you're going to get invited to raves. Be careful.
Yeah. My favorite line from him is when they all get captured by the bad guys. And he says something like, don't hurt my daughter. And then he's like, I don't know who these kids are. You can do whatever you want to them, or something along those lines. I was like, that's great.
Not only that, one of them is his nephew.
Oh, yeah. I didn't pick up on that.
I started shouting that because I watched it at kind of an empty theater. I was just in there by myself. And like, he's like, oh, we're going to kill these kids too. Like, nah, I don't care about this. I was like, one of them's Diego.
Yeah, that is... I didn't pick up on that. That's right. That's awesome. Speaking of Diego, I think they did a really smart move of having him move out and then kind of being like... I think he's supposed to be the one the audience... what is the word? Identifies with most, because... You know, when he was a kid, presumably the audience would have watched it when they're kids too. And then, you know, you grow up and you're in high school. And high school is way different than when you're a kid watching Dora the Explorer. And then you have, like, this weird girl pop back into your life who is nothing like anyone else. It's just, like, all positivity and stuff. I think that was a good move for them because I imagine the audience felt the same way where they're like, you know... They just watched Good Boys, or I can't even like pick it, but cut that. But you know, they're used to a lot more of an adult sense of humor. But then they go back to this kid show, and it's like, oh, you know, kids things can still be fun. I don't have to be edgy teenager all the time.
Yeah. So, what did you think of Benicio as Swiper?
I mean, I liked what I heard from him. He had maybe like 10 lines in this movie. He was good. I don't know if this is the only time he's ever voice acted. If it was, he did a very good job. He's funny. He delivered his lines well, but I wish there was more of him.
I agree. When they first introduce him and he does this, like, Swiper, yes, swiping, and does the salute, I was like, oh, yes, he's going to talk throughout. But until they have a conversation with him towards the end, or not really a conversation, but an exchange, and... The entire movie, I kept thinking, can they hear him speaking, or is it just for the audience? But then towards the end, he's walking back and forth singing, guarding the gate, and the guy looks at him and goes, stop singing, it's unprofessional. I was like, they can't hear him!
Yeah, I mean, the rules on this of animals talking was real loosey-goosey.
Yeah, because the entire time, Dora's trying to convince them that Boots can speak, and they were like, yeah, okay, a talking monkey. But, like, there's a talking fox in front of them the entire time, and none of them bat an eye.
Yeah, they just bring up that he's wearing a mask.
Oh, that was a great scene.
I think my favorite scene in this one though was the poo song, and when the girl's going to take a poop, and then she's just like, everyone just saw me pooping, and they're just like kind of go past
Dig
it.
in the poo hole.
Yeah, that was good. But I will say this movie definitely pulled from some other movies. Like the last third of the movie is a ripoff of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Yeah, it's pure Indiana Jones.
Straight up into the puzzle where they have to pick the correct thing, and the one guy's like, it's clearly this gold, and it's like, no, it's something that's way different. Oh, it's water, or it's, you know, it's this crappy looking cup. Like, it was so Last Crusade. And then the final credits, it went to a mixture between like High School Musical and also actually they pulled from Mean Girls earlier in the movie when she was in high school.
Yeah. That song at the end gets stuck in my head so bad, and I'm sure I'm going to be singing it for like the next day and a half now.
Yeah, it's a catchy song.
Oh man.
I don't have much else to say about this. Actually, I'll ask you about Benicio at the end.
Yeah, I don't think I have much. I mean, I already talked about it in a different episode, so I'd just mostly be repeating myself.
Yeah. So this was directed by James Bobbin, who also did Muppets, Muppets Most Wanted, and Alice Through the Looking Glass. He doesn't have too many movies to his credit, but they mostly appear to be more geared towards children. Do you know how this did with a budget?
Yeah, so it cost $49 million. It made $105, so it roughly doubled its money, which I'm happy about. They kind of allude at the end to another adventure, so I would absolutely love if they made another one of these.
Same. So on Rotten Tomato, it had a critic score of 84% and an audience score of 88%. I would tend to agree with somewhere in their mid-80s. It's a nice short movie, so it was easy to watch. I ended up watching a stream of it that was filmed from like the first row of a movie theater, and then it just had text kept popping over it. So when I can actually rent it, I might actually re-rent it to see it from a normal angle.
Oh, I wanted to ask you what you thought of the like psychedelic pollen.
Oh, I thought that part was hilarious. I was not expecting
that. Was
it.
One where your wife sent me a Snapchat and she came back in the room and they were all cartoons, and it said something like, I left the room for 1 minute, and it's like, ooh, you picked the wrong minute to leave.
Yeah, like out of nowhere, like they're just tripping.
That was great. That was one that as soon as it started, I was like, I can't believe this is in this movie. And that's how I felt about a lot of the dialogue just in general. Like it's all over the map. You get stuff that's goofy, like she knocks somebody out with a yo-yo, and it's like, oh, he got yo-yoed again? Yeah, again. And then there's another scene, like maybe a minute and a half later, where Dora's like, oh, he's not gonna let us go. He's gonna kill all of us. And it's like, wow, that's really intense.
Oh, and then like Creepy Boots talks and gives her a pep talk. Like it worked somehow, even though it shouldn't have. Like it was actually emotional.
Boots, voiced by Danny Trejo.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm Christian. I told you this when we did the last episode, and I stick by it. This seems like it's a parody movie that someone did on YouTube of Dora 10 years later. But it's an actual Nickelodeon, like, back to movie.
Yeah, like, almost all of the discourse I saw online about this was essentially, I can't believe this movie exists.
It's insane. I mean, they do a good job. I'm now a Dora the Explorer fan.
Yes.
So, what did you think of Benicio in this before we head out?
I thought he was good. Like you said, I don't know if he has done any other voice work or not, but I think he did a good job. He played it, like, just goofy enough that I was always excited to see Swiper on screen.
Alright guys, thanks for checking out our episode. If you want to contact us, we are at Gambots Network on Twitter, or we're gambots.blog@gmail.com. You can send us in suggestions for our Amazon review game, and we'll probably end up using them. If you guys are listening on somewhere you could rate, we'd appreciate it. It would help us get some more listens if you rate and subscribe to whatever you listen on. Otherwise, thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you.